Hi guys, my name is Zach. Today I'm going to show you how to create a start menu in Unity using Simple UI. First thing you want to do is create a new project. I'm going to select 2D for this, but you can really do this with 2D or 3D. And I'm just going to call this start menu. Once this loads up, the first thing we want to do is actually go to the asset store and download the Simple UI asset. Go ahead and go to the asset store tab, type Simple UI. And it's this first one here, it's $7.99. The link for this will also be in the description. Go ahead and click import. And this comes with all kinds of awesome content that can be used for settings buttons, mobile buttons, icons, as well as backgrounds and this font. And some other images here as well. Once it's downloaded, we're going to go ahead and head over to our scene, and I'm actually going to create a new scene. And call it main menu. Going to open that up. And I'm going to actually go ahead and throw in the background that came with the Simple UI asset pack. So inside here, we've got a background. So I'm just going to drop this in here. Then in order to create our UI, the first thing we want to do is actually create a canvas. So I'm going to right click over here, go to UI, canvas. This is where our UI is going to live. I'm going to double click on it to focus into it. Now, the first thing we want to do is actually go down to UI Text Mesh Pro. We're going to put in our title. And this is going to pop up with a TMP importer. This is an asset that was purchased by Unity, so we have to import the essentials for it. So go ahead and click import there. Cool. And then we are going to click on our canvas, and we're going to add a vertical layout group. And we're going to scale everything. And then for the actual text, we want this to be centered. And we're just going to call this an awesome game. Now, you will see that this has a default font on there. It doesn't actually look that good. So what we're going to do is we're going to give this a custom font. So in our simple UI, there is a fonts file in here. And you'll see that they just imported a font. You can do this with pretty much any font you want. You can just go out to the internet, download a font, bring it into Unity. Once it's into Unity in a format like this, you right click on it and go to Create, Text Mesh Pro font asset. And that creates this font. Now, if you take this font and you drag it into this font asset, you now get the font you were looking for. We're also going to add a gradient to this. So we are going to create Text Mesh Pro color gradient. And so we have 4 corners here where we can kind of set what we want our gradient to look like. I think I'm going to go for some sort of orange in the corner. I'm going to save that color so I can use it in both corners. And then maybe some sort of gray in the bottom corner. Color gradient, check the box, and then you could drag it in. Cool. So we can press play and see what that looks like. Right now our title is a little bit small, so I'm going to go ahead and make it a little bit bigger. And it kind of looks like our name is fading away here. So I'm actually going to go into my gradient and I'm going to change this to um, maybe a white. Cool. So the next thing we want to do is actually create some buttons for us to click on. So go ahead and right click on your canvas, go down to UI, um, Button, Text Mesh Pro. Now you will see this automatically scales up to half the screen because we set this canvas group to vertical layout grouping. This ensures that all of our stuff is centered and lines up with each other and fills the box. If we don't want it to fill the box, we can change so it doesn't match the height. And then add some more. But we will worry about that when we have some more items in there. So the first thing we want to do is change the image of this button. So right now this button is using just the default button sprite. We're actually going to change that to use the button sprite provided with a simple UI pack. So you see they have a couple of different buttons in here with this pack. We're actually going to use the blue one, so we're just going to take this out, make sure button is selected in the inspector, drag this in here, and now we have our button. Then we're going to go into our font. Once again here, we're going to check that box for color gradient. We're going to give it the same gradient that we used before. So head back to our font file and drag in our gradient and our font because we want to have matching font. And it looks like the gradient is not enabled for whatever reason. So we'll worry about that in a moment. Now we want to decide what this button's going to say. This is going to be the play button, and we're going to name this button accordingly. So you can go to this button and press F2. That'll give you the rename option, and I'm just going to call it play button. All right. Now we have our first button. We're going to go ahead and duplicate this a couple times. All right. Once we've duplicated our button a couple times here, we'll go ahead and change these to say what they're going to be. So this first one is going to be an options button. This last one will be an exit button. And we'll change what the text say as well. Options, exit. You'll also see that no longer, like our title text is at the top, but we want it to be centered. So we'll go ahead and set that there. Probably make it even a little bit bigger. So if we click play, you can see we have three buttons. They have a little bit of a color tint when we hover over them, and a click animation when you click them. But so far they don't do anything. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is actually resize our buttons so they look a little bit better. So I'm going to uncheck the box for control width on our canvas under the vertical layout group, and uncheck the force expand width. Then you'll see that makes our buttons shrink. So I'm actually going to go into each of our buttons and I'm going to set the width to 300. I'll go back to the canvas group here and we're actually going to add some spacing between our buttons. So I'm going to add 25 pixels between each of our items. And it looks like they're still a little bit big. So I'm actually going to uncheck control height as well. That's going to make them get really small. So then we're going to go back into the buttons here and change the height to 80. Cool. And you see that our vertical layout group keeps everything vertically aligned in the center, and the center of the screen as well, horizontally. All right, now that we have our buttons, let's go ahead and start work on a main menu. So on our project, I'm going to create a new folder here, and I'm going to call it scripts. And then I'm going to create a new C# script called main menu. If I double click to open this, this is going to open it up in Visual Studio, which you should see coming up here in a minute. Cool. So here we have our main menu object. It has a couple of built-in things, start and update. We probably won't be using these, but start is very commonly used. Highly doubt we'll use anything in update. So I'm going to go ahead and delete this out here. And we're going to create a couple new methods. So just go ahead and type public void, which means it's not going to return anything. For simplicity's sake, we'll just name this quit. And in here, we're just going to put application.quit. And what this will do is actually close out your game when this method gets called. So we're going to hook this up to our exit button in just a moment. While we're in here though, we're also going to do a new method called public void start game. And we're going to call scene manager dot load scene, and we're just going to give it a 1. This is actually going to be the index of the second scene in our game. For now, know that this is indicating the order of the scenes in the build manager. So go ahead and save this screen, Control S, and then go ahead and go back into Unity. Now on the play button, we are going to go down to this on-click box, which is empty, and we're going to add something. And we're going to take the main menu object, drag it onto the canvas, and then take the canvas that you just drug the main menu onto and drag that into the play button's on click. And you can actually select main menu, which is the script we just wrote, and start game, which is the method we wrote for starting the game. Do the same thing for exit, click on plus sign, drag canvas into that item, go to main menu, quit. Now we're going to set up the build order so you can see the play button actually doing something. So go ahead and go to build settings, file build settings. It's going to pop up this window here. And you'll see that there's only one scene in the build order, and that is the sample scene, which isn't even the scene that our main menu is in. So we're going to add open scenes, and we're going to reorder these. So we're just going to assume that sample scene is our actual game scene, and you can see its index is now 1. And main menu is where we want to load up whenever we first open the game. So now that we have that setting, we can actually just click play here. And if we click this button, you'll see it transfers us to our sample scene. There's nothing in it, but that's okay. So now we know that our play button works. If you click the exit button, you'll notice it doesn't do anything. This is because we're actually in the editor. But if you go to File, Build Settings, and you actually build and run this game, that exit button will close the resulting application. So now what we want to do is actually build the options menu. Before we start, we're actually going to go down into the canvas, go to this vertical layout group that we created earlier, and we're actually going to remove it. Then we're going to create a new panel by right-clicking on canvas, going to panel, move it to the top here. We're going to rename this to main menu panel. and then we're actually going to hold shift and select all of our components, title and 3 buttons, and drag it under the main menu panel. Then we're going to click on the main menu panel, go down to color, and set this to 0. We want it to be transparent. Great. Now we have our main menu stuff isolated. So we're going to click on Canvas, go to UI, and once again create another panel. This is going to be our options panel. So we'll name it accordingly. And this time we actually want it to have a background. We just don't want it to stretch to fit this whole screen. So we're actually just going to give it a border. 200 all the way around seems, no, 200 is too much. 200 on the left and right, and 100 on the top and bottom to create our panel. This is actually going to pop up over our menu. And then for the background, we're going to go back into that simple UI asset and go into PNG. And you'll see that there is a UI fill sky and panel window texture. We're actually going to go to options panel as in the inspector, and we're going to drag this UI panel window into the background slot. And you'll see that it's still transparent, so we actually want to get rid of that. We want it to be fully solid. And so we just drag the alpha to 255 on here. And in our options panel, we need a couple of options. So let's go ahead and go down to UI and put in Text Mesh Pro. Actually, let's delete this. We'll actually copy our title text and use it as a header for this. So we're going to duplicate this item for title text, put it into options panel. We're going to make the font size smaller, maybe not that small. We'll do 40. And we're just going to change the text to say options. And then we'll rename this to say options text. And we'll add a few more components in here. We'll add in a slider and a toggle, as well as a button that we will use as a back button. Alright, so now you can see they're all kind of on top of each other because we're not using a layout group. So let's go ahead and actually add a layout group. So go click on the options panel, and once again go add a vertical layout group, set it to middle center, and this will lay out all of our options for us. For the slider, go ahead and select it so you have it in the inspector. Once again, we're going to go into the simple UI asset, and we're going to go into PNG, and you'll see that we have a couple different fills in here. So we're going to go into slider, have this selected in the inspector, and then you'll see that this has some subcomponents. So it has a fill area and a background. The background we want to be probably some sort of grayish color. So let's just go ahead and select some sort of gray in here. So that's what it will look like when it is not filled. I think that looks good. And then for the fill area, we'll want to expand this again and change the fill to actually be this UI fill green. So now you'll see if we click play, you can drag the slider around and the fill will kind of fill up with the green background color that we selected. Now for the handle slider, we actually want this to be a button. So for the handle slide area, open it up and select handle, then go back into the PNG, and we're actually going to replace this knob with the button image. And you'll see that it is a little bit too big here, so I am going to go ahead and scale this down to about half size. Maybe 75. 75%. And now we want to add a image on top of this button. We want it to scale to the size of the button, which is going to be pretty small. And the actual image is going to be a pause icon. So if we go into Simple UI Vector Icons 128 and we type pause, you'll see this icon pops up here, and we're actually going to drop this in the sprite image. So now you'll see that it lines up on top of our button, and I'm going to make this a little bit smaller as well, scale it down to 75%. Then we're going to take the entire slider here, and we're actually going to make this a little bit bigger. So cool. So now if we click play, we can see that we have a little pause button slider, and there we go. Then we want to update our toggle. So we're going to actually change this toggle to also be 1.5 times the size. And then in the text here, we're going to change the label to Text Mesh Pro. So we're actually going to delete this out. We're going to go to UI, Text Mesh Pro. We're going to drag in our font from earlier. So if we go back to, let's clear our search criteria here. And we go back to assets, Simple UI fonts. Here's our font. We're going to put this in here. And we're going to go ahead and click set the size to 12. And this needs to be centered vertically and horizontally. We're just going to call this the mute toggle. For the background, we're going to change this to one of our Simple UI background colors under the PNG. So go to here, go to the toggle background, and set it to this green probably. And we're actually going to also change the check mark to be a Simple UI check mark. So go back into sample vector icons, and the background item that we actually want for the check mark image that we actually want is called icon confirm. So we actually drag the confirm box in there, and you'll see that we now have a little checkbox that will appear and disappear. I'm going to go ahead and actually apply that gradient to our text for our toggle here. This is text. Go ahead and select the color gradient. Go ahead and head back to the fonts folder, and then we're going to drag our gradient into that box. Cool. Now what we can do is set up our back button. So once again, we're going to change this button to use the PNG button image. We're going to make this significantly smaller, probably by half. And then for the button, we're actually going to call this back button. And I'm going to copy our text here and put it in this button because I forgot to use the Text Mesh Pro one. Set this all to 0. Center it. Set it to 0, and we're going to change the text to say back. Now we can start hooking up these buttons. So the back button here, we're going to start with that. Go ahead and click on it. Go down to the on-click section in the inspector, and you're actually going to click the plus sign and then drag the options panel into that object, and you're going to go to game object dot set active. And you do not want to check this box. Now what this will do is this will actually deactivate your options slider when you click that button. So if we click play, you'll see that you can click the back button and it will make the options button go away. So now we need to hook up the options button to open the panel. So if we click on the options button, you're going to do the same thing. We're going to click the plus sign. We're going to drag the options panel in there. We're going to go to game object, and we're going to go to set active, and we're going to check it. So this will mean what this means is every time we click that button, it will set this value to true and open this panel, or set this panel to be enabled. So we're going to disable this by default, but we'll worry about that once we're done with all the settings. For now, we're actually gonna import some music so that we can tell if our options are working. So on our main menu, main camera, I'm actually going to create a new audio source. And this we're gonna need some audio for. So I'm gonna go ahead and go to the asset store and search for some free menu music. So menu music. And you can use whatever song you want. I'm gonna check the free search box here, and you can get music outside of Unity as well. I'm gonna go ahead and use this EDM loop and download it. So this is gonna download. I'll import it real quick. And now that we have an audio source, we can actually go into our assets, go to this RIC 4K Productions, MP3, Loop 1, and we're actually just going to drag this into the audio clip there. Now you'll see this has a volume slider in here that we can use to adjust it. And we have play on awake checked, and we're going to check loop so it will loop continuously. But you'll see that the volume here is set to 1. If we click play, you'll see it's quite loud, but we can turn it down with this slider. But we want our options panel to be able to do that. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to write another script. So click on the options panel, and we're going to add a component, and we're going to type script, and we're going to call it options. That's going to go ahead and create a new script in the background, and we're going to just click on the dots here to edit the script. This is going to open it up in Visual Studio. The first thing we want to do is actually create a reference to our audio source. So we're going to say public audio source, and we'll just call it audio. Now the reason we call it public is so that we can actually set it in the inspector. So if I save this with Control S, you'll actually see in the options panel, if we expand it out, that there is now an audio source variable here that we can fill out. So we can just drag this audio source into that, and now we can access that in our script. So if we go back to editing the script, whenever we want, we can now interact with that audio. So we're going to create a new public void method called set volume, and this is going to take a float, which is just a decimal number, and we're just going to call it vol. And when this gets called, we're actually just going to set the volume on audio.volume equals vol. And we also want to be able to mute it, so we'll call public void mute. Which will take a Boolean that we'll call mute. And now we can type audio dot mute equal to mute. In order to avoid confusion here, I'm going to rename this to muted. Cool. Now we just have to hook up our toggle and slider to these methods. So if we go back to Unity, in the slider, you'll see that there is an on value changed. So what this does is anytime that the value of the volume slider changes, it will call this method. So we're going to drag in our options panel, and then under options, you'll see at the very top here, there's a dynamic float set volume. This is a method that we just wrote. It accepts a float, and Unity recognizes that, so it puts it at the top. So if we call that here, it will set past the volume value to the set volume method. For the toggle, we're going to do the same thing. On value changed, we're going to call in the options panel. We're going to go to options, and we're going to go to mute, which is the method that we just wrote. So now we are going to disable this for start because it starts with the volume on, and we're going to disable our options panel, and we're going to go ahead and click play. So now you can see that our volume slider actually is controlling the volume. If we turn it on and click the mute button, you'll see that it gets muted. And then we can go back, and there we go. Our menu is done. If you enjoyed this video, if you learned something, please like and subscribe. If you have questions or if you want me to do a tutorial on something else, let me know in the comments down below. Thanks.